Hello and welcome to Saunders on Security, where we discuss everything security for the busy CISO. And today I'm very happy to have with me Steve Jump. Steve is the head of Custodiate Advisory Services. And Steve, if I'm correct, that's linking into who watches the watchers. Am I right on that?
Yes, custodia is from an old Latin phrase which means nothing to most people, but it means who guards the guardians. In other words, who keeps the people who protect us safe. And I'm trying to make sure in the CISO space that there is someone to have the backs of CISOs when they are being put under pressure by their businesses. And also those people aspiring to be CISOs get guided in the right problems to address and the right ways to do it.
Fantastic. Well, that's exactly what we're here for today. So I think if you can give us a little bit about yourself, what your passions are, what's exciting about the space that you're in now, what gets you going for this?
Okay, my background, from a very young age, I loved to take things apart and find out how they worked. So that led me into a career in engineering. Electronic engineering is what I specialized in, and I built and did electronic things. That turned me into a reasonably competent systems engineer because electronics works in a continuum. So by the School of Hard Knocks, my first engineering experiences were, why doesn't it work? It should work. It's all right by design. Why isn't it happening in real life? And the tricks of systems engineering to work out how that happened translated into almost every other aspect of my engineering career. From setting up and running ISPs, building satellite links into the middle of Africa when people said it was impossible, creating ISPs literally in the middle of Botswana, being an electronics specialist when the person who can spell electronics is assumed to be the computer genius. Didn't start out that way, but when it's you, the computer, or nothing, you learn fast. So I built computer systems from scratch, fixed them, installed them in factories, got into internet service providers, ran a fairly successful consultancy, which was acquired by a major South African company and bought out. And then I moved on from there in consulting, came down to South Africa, got into IT, internet, telecommunications, spent quite a few years fixing lots and lots of problems in telecom, which was equivalent to 10 university educations in and of its own right.
I can bet.
And I found I was facing information security, cybersecurity problems from day one. To be completely honest, on day one, I didn't recognize them, but I learned to. And then when I found out what it actually means, I started to get a passion for fixing them and a passion for trying to help other people to avoid falling off the same cliffs I'd fallen off with some degree of success. Most of the people who have worked with me, I can't say I protected them from every possible disaster, but most of them were totally non-fatal.
Yeah, no, that's great. Non-fatal is a good way to go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Set expectations.
So Steve, you mentioned like looking after the people who look after security. So give us an idea of the security landscape that you operate in. What do you work on a day-to-day basis now?
Okay, well, security landscape is huge. Everything that we do today has a degree of digitization or digitalization. And this last 12 months has been spectacular for highlighting that to people who have taken it for granted. Yeah. We live in an interconnected world. Business, applications, data, cloud is happening to everybody. Whether you have a big data center, and there's a lot of people who have big data centers, whether you're moving into the cloud, which, hint for those of you who haven't started it yet, cloud means someone else's data center. It has the same rules as the one you have and a whole load more that you may not yet have discovered. So I work on the edge of that, and literally the changes from an engineering aspect, IT security into information security, has been subtle. I have been riding that wave, and it took me a while to realize that actually it's not subtle. The driving force is we now need to be considering what is the business risk to the value of the information that we use to run our businesses? There are many things that can affect that value, not just cybersecurity, but cybersecurity gets the headlines, and cybersecurity and IT security are areas that you can get it spectacularly wrong.
Yes,
so
yes, indeed.
Many of the conversations I have with my customers, apart from trying to convince them that I know what I'm talking about, I can generally get away with that part, is actually helping them to get value out of that engagement, such that the problems they are facing, they've normally come through to me, they've been referred to me because they have an issue with technology. Now, fortunately, I'm fairly fluent in technology. But the secret, and maybe you can help me share that with your other contacts, is it is rarely a technical problem. It is normally a risk problem that is being incorrectly managed through blind application of technology. So
Absolutely.
In the environment that I work, I try and translate back from the technology, which can, if I'm working with the technology officer or security officer, part of that is teaching them how to address their problems in a language that business can consume.
Yes.
Because ultimately, if you can't express your risk in rands and cents, or the likelihood that it's going to cost you rands and cents, or millions of rands and cents, then it becomes another IT technical component failure. And there's more than enough of those that you're lost in the noise.
Yeah, and then you suffer with the budget cuts because, well, why is this not working?
That's a risk perspective. It goes way beyond cybersecurity. So I talk into that space, but the area that I'm most confident in is in basically applied resolution of, I call it smart thinking, risk-based smart thinking. Work out what the risks are that cause you the biggest concerns. And that is often not just an IT issue. That involves building a bridge between business, and I spent a lot of time in the corporate world. So I use the definition of the people in business. Anybody who is depending on the revenue or profit from your IT applications, business, retail systems. So in other words, the people who are supposed to be making the profits higher and the costs to run lower and increasing the number of customers, I use the euphemism business. It's completely multipartite. There's no one size fits all. If you're dealing with people that are selling IT, it's a different concept than people that are using IT. And that sometimes is a foundation conversation, because people are so tied up in the technology that they have forgotten that that technology is only there to support business.
Yes, and the amount of times that gets wrong and is implemented badly, and then the value isn't there, like you say, it's astounding.
So literally, it's not common sense, or everyone can do it, but it's basically realigning of perceptions.
Yeah.
So in those conversations, if you're a small company going straight into the cloud, you've usually got energy, enthusiasm, and you have not yet worked out that there are sharks in the ocean. So that is a conversation around, we need to get you there faster, we need to get you there more sustainably, and we would very much like to get you there in ways that don't put you at risk or your customers at risk.
Yeah.
Because the reality of online is, for every opportunity you've seen, there's 10 people trying to take it.
Yeah.
You can't afford to get it wrong.
No, that's absolutely true. We move so quickly now.
Yeah. And then for those more mature customers, some have CISOs, some are looking to build security teams, some are looking to outsource with security service providers. They all have different conversations. And I usually start my conversation with asking them what's important to the business. What is, if you've got IT systems or cloud systems, what are the most significant ones of those? Which ones are valuable? And I've got a question which anybody can actually ask. I suggest you ask the question, don't try it out practically, is when you have a list of systems, look the person you are producing the list for straight in the eye and say, if I switch this system off at the mains, what happens to your business? The initial response to that can be quite entertaining, but the reality is it's quite often a thought process that the people that built those systems never went through.
Oh, it's not an
And that is
eventuality
actually,
that's supposed to happen. So,
well, look, I totally believe in reliable engineering, but we're all human.
yeah.
Mistakes will happen. Things will break. In fact, anything that can be made will eventually break.
Hmm.
So this is all part of what I call an intelligent risk mindset. Consider what can go wrong and make appropriate steps to prevent it going wrong.
Hmm.
And I take that conversation into the cybersecurity field because, as you may have noticed, there are no shortage of people with very interesting technologies and very compelling reasons why those technologies will make you safer from all the problems you had never anticipated.
Yeah. And I think we're going to discuss one of those today, because
Okay, that's fair
I would
enough.
like to pick your brains on one in particular that is being thrown around a lot, and I think we're seeing much more of a prevalence of it now because of work from home and what we've seen with COVID-19 and the whole global change and all of that, and that rapid digitalization that you were talking about, and that is zero trust. And it's something that I'm seeing sprayed out everywhere, and I would really like to get your opinion on this zero trust space, because I work in the space as well where I consult to clients, and many of my clients are having this zero trust market to do them, like being shoved down their throats, really. And I'd love to get your take on the hype of this marketing around zero trust and all of that. What is your thoughts on it?
I don't know, how long have we got, Ross?
We've got plenty of time.
Okay, I'll try and keep it brief. Okay, this is the epitome of what I have been talking about. There is a need for increased trust and for that to be properly managed and to be provably managed. Okay, so zero trust as a concept, I don't have a problem with. But its use as a buzzword to wrap everything, even technologies that I thought had long since died along the roadside, have been dusted off and given a zero trust label. So I have a degree of cynicism here. The principle behind it, however, I am totally in support of. If we take a step slightly to the side, we hear about all of this malware problem. Ransomware is rife. We hear about phishing. We hear about compromise, stealing information breaches. At the core, I won't say all of them, but a very large majority of all of these issues is the fact that someone is able to compromise an identity. They are usually to get in through misconfigured or either badly configured or unconfigured systems with that one identity, escalate the privileges of that identity from general user to super user or super admin, and then run rings around the system they've got access to until basically they can do what they like, up to and including deploying their own ransomware, either as ransomware or more likely to hide what they've taken.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, that identity, the rights of that identity, the privilege management of that identity, that is the foundation of trust. So as I was explaining to someone last week, zero trust is a great way of putting in front of you that not only are there people out there trying to break things, not only can things go wrong, but there really are people out to get you. So it's not fair to say you're paranoid if there really are people who are trying to steal your cheese.
Yeah,
okay, that's mixing multiple metaphors. Right. So as a problem statement, it is real. How you fix it, though, in the zero trust, there is no magic silver bullet. You can't just buy a zero trust solution and expect all your problems have gone away. The reality is you need to be looking at what matters, and understand what can be done, what has been done, and what needs to be done. So as with all vendors who are selling solutions, if their first point of contact with you is you need a zero trust solution and they haven't listened to you, The same way, if I try and sell you a second-hand car, you should be very, very suspicious about its specifications.
Yeah, I think
and ignore the smoke. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting point you make there, just with someone trying to sell a zero trust solution. I think there's a lot of marketing hype that it is a one-stop shop, whereas, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in this whole zero trust environment. There's identity and access management. There's things like encryption. There's the access control. It's the users. What do you see as being? I mean, there's a lot of marketing, but I think you've touched on a lot of it already as well. What is the crux of the value in it that you see?
Okay, the real value. We've been working towards it for many, many years. Treating information as the asset that requires protection. Not so much the infrastructure or the network, but the actual information itself. So once we know where the information of value is, we should have an idea of how it needs to be used. And when we know how it needs to be used, we know where it is and how it can be protected. The technologies we already have. Then the other part is what is going to be accessing this information? What's it going to be doing with it? This is where the users, and we have this wonderful framework of users and entities. If you hadn't spotted, the robots are coming if they're not already here. An awful lot of information access is technically automated. It's carried out by another application, often on behalf of another application. And occasionally there's a human being who benefits from all that hard work. So every one of those points, we need to know who is knocking on the door. Do we know them? Are they allowed to come in through that door? And when they do, what are they allowed to do? None of this is new. But because it's complicated, and we've normally been trying to roll solutions out at a real high speed, quite often we either forget to install the door, even though the door has armor-plated locks. We say, let's leave it open, it's too much to administer. So when we start pushing this through the whole zero trust, it means we should not be letting anonymous people in. We should not be letting anonymous systems in. Information should not be left in a native machine-readable format, and networks should not be automatically traversable by unvalidated entities. None of this is new. We've been talking about this for 25 years.
Yeah.
Zero trust just puts a spotlight on if we start to follow those principles, and I'm not advocating any zero trust solutions, but if we start following those principles of knowing what we have, knowing where it is, knowing how it needs to be protected, and then checking that that protection works. And then we start controlling the access. Now, most of this access is going to be automated. I was teasing someone the other day exactly on this. They gave me a very nice poster on how fast modern technology can crack a password, which is great. It's a technical threat. The reality is this is noise designed to scare people, because I've got 2 points. Why would you design an application that would allow machine speed attempting to try passwords? Generally speaking, it should be 3 or maybe 5 strikes and you're out.
Yeah.
2, all of your external access should have some kind of multi-factor or token-based access based on who you are or where you're coming in from.
Absolutely agreed.
And then the other side of that is, well, what if I've got your password database? Well, okay, that's an interesting conversation. How did you get my password database? Okay, because that's a complete rabbit warren. You shouldn't have it. I should not have built it in a way that you could read it even if you get it.
Yeah.
And if you have it, I should have had some understanding that the rate of technology changing, because knowing Moore's law, I'm kind of hoping everyone working in security has heard of Moore's law.
I'd hope so.
That if you built a system in 2010, you should have had every expectation that the processor power available to exploit your encryption within 10 years would be 1,000,000 times greater. 10 years ago, you could have written encryption that was well within the invisible time periods and would still be valid if someone was trying to brute force it. It's a question of thinking about the problem, looking at your risks.
Yeah.
So that's really what I'm doing. I'm talking about those risks. In the zero trust space, I'm saying it's a guide. Zero trust is something to pay attention to. But just buying a zero trust solution, I think, is probably going to give you more hurt than good. But listening to the lessons that zero trust is teaching, now that is worth your while.
Yeah, I had such an interesting conversation with a company a little while back that I was doing training for, and it was so refreshing. And they never mentioned zero trust once. It's a fintech company, and their approach is literally that if a human being shouldn't have access to a portion, why should they? And
yeah,
they've built this fantastic system, because I went in to go do a complete workshop of their entire security, and all my normal questions of, well, who has access to this? No one. What about this step? No one. And that? No one. And they were saying, well, why, if the only act, by giving someone access, that's where the fraud comes in. If everything is systematic and it's limited to each system handing off to each other, and only those systems can hand off, and it's not human readable, where's their risk? And it was fantastic to chat to them. And it short-circuited much of the training I was giving to them, simply because they had locked it down so much that at any point, if someone steals a piece of data, it's of no value, and everything is happening without human intervention throughout the stretch. It was phenomenal to actually see. I was very excited about that.
Well, I'm officially jealous, but I'm glad there aren't too many people like that around at the moment, because pretty much my entire future career is based on helping people to get to that state.
Yeah.
But you mentioned they're in fintech.
Yes.
Okay, well, here we have, this is the complete archetype of information equaling value. The bits and bytes in fintech are money.
Yeah, very much so.
So those lessons have been learnt early, and they have been learnt hard. Yeah. But those principles are applicable to absolutely every business environment.
Absolutely. I see that in privacy all the time as well. And I think now, and this is diverting a little, there's such a focus on personal information. And I had this conversation with another client the other day. Yes, personally, and I mean, I'm in the privacy space all day, every day. That's my biggest spot that I work in. But personal information is not the only information that has value. Yes, we're getting there now in that people are seeing personal information as value, but it again comes back to what you were saying. What's sensitive? What's confidential? What's secret? Where do these sit? What's the value attached to them? And I'm amazed that we still have such a long way to go with identifying this.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping it lasts for a little while. For total self-centered interest, I still need to earn a living for a few years before I actually get as old as I look grey now. But the reality there is, we've always known that information was a requirement for business, and loss of it was a threat to business. As the technology has moved, the entry costs for people who wish to get into the side of a technology business, it's no longer state nation. Anybody with a few $100s can acquire the equipment to run state level decryption or testing or network access. So there are no real technical boundaries. Yeah. What there are now, practically the only way we have that is smart defenses. And those smart defenses are practically using the technology that we have in the most beneficial way to fix our problems. In many cases, we have that technology. I talk to people who have the PKI, public key infrastructure-based encryption. And I ask, who manages the keys to their PKI server? It's one of these things. I talk a lot about Russian dolls lately, because it's layers within layers within layers.
Yeah.
And I was explaining to someone who was in the process of moving their Active Directory into the cloud. I think I might have been a little bit rude, because I was pointing out that what may have worked in a data center with a door and no internet access 20 years ago is not an appropriate configuration for a brand new Azure AD. So copying what you have because it worked for the last 20 years might not be the best approach.
Yes.
That was the closest I've had to an argument since I've been consulting, because I was obviously wrong, and I had to demonstrate that actually it was not logical to be just moved. We have new technologies, we have new capabilities, we have old systems. Many of our old systems were tweaked. In other words, we wore off the sharp corners, we oiled the bits that were squeaking, and we've ignored everything else. They work, but they may not work as well as we need them to do into the future. So part of the cost of transition, moving from internal operations to cloud, part of the business value for that are certain efficiencies that the technology gives. But you've got to consider the entire cost. Your security profile changes, your user access profile changes, your data segmentation and your actual application runtimes may change.
Yeah.
None of these are cost-free. So you're gonna have to do something that's gonna cost money. But if you do it right, you can front load that cost. So you can start using it as you move into the secured environment. And if you've done it right, you get this free bonus, which I often put on the table, is secure code, secure applications, well-configured systems are always more stable than historically updated and maintained systems. That first time out, and there are better ways to test these at construction time than we ever had 10 years ago.
Yeah.
There's no excuse to not do it.
Yeah, there was something interesting that I did with another client. We did an analysis, and you mentioned Azure, talking on moving stuff from on-premise to Azure. And it was going to be, and I get nervous when I hear the term lift and shift, when it's you're not analyzing what is available to you now in the new packages of Azure. And there was a whole view that, we're just going to transfer the systems as they are down here, push them up into the cloud, and then we'll patch it up later as to how it needs to fit in. Whereas there's whole new ecosystems of Intune and endpoint management and all of these the whole new world of doing things that cost less than running those machines in a lift and shift. And just changing the viewpoint of, well, how can we do this better there, changed the cost entirely. And I think that's something I want to ask you is, if we look at a smaller company with these kind of requirements that we're seeing now, is it something that they can implement nicely, or is it just these dollar signs that they're going to see? We've started hinting on that now.
It depends. Look, it's all about value. The whole information security question is about value. If the cost to recover and repair after an incident is less to reputation and recovery than it would cost you to put the defensive systems in, your business model is quite clear. But where we're dealing with personal information, sometimes there's other costs. When we're dealing with transferring legacy systems, this brings us into an interesting business risk. Older systems quite often are running on older hardware with older versions. Generally speaking, after you've had software running for about 7 years, the cost of maintaining it tends to start to become excessive.
Yeah.
And Microsoft is a case in point. If you have 10-year-old software from Microsoft, they will certainly keep it running for you, but you're paying 8 to 10 times more for that than you did to buy it in the first place. Consider whose business model you're supporting.
Yes.
It might make sense, okay? But if you haven't asked the questions, there's a good chance you're spending too much for things that aren't necessary. So part of your entire business risk profile is, how do I maximize my profit, minimize the risks to that profit, and basically benefit from this technology to grow my business, ideally, without increasing the complexity or the need for extra people, or what's happening now. Because I hang out with people of my generation who were DBAs 20 years ago. They work 2-3 days a week, and they are earning as much in those 2-3 days a week as they were in a month 5 years ago, because people have got to the point they can't run their businesses without that technology working. Now, that is just a simple day-to-day bug fix, wear out fix. Now we start adding security into that, because if those systems contain information that is worth paying that much to protect it, is anybody interested in stealing it from you? I mean, the reality is people won't steal things that aren't worth anything, but it's obviously worth something to you.
Yeah.
If somebody decides that it being worth something to you could be ransomed, have you thought about it? Have you designed it? It's one of those things you need to go through. And the first part of this, and first part of the conversation I have with anyone is, what really matters? Have you gone through a list of things that can go wrong? And I'm not talking about, if you talk to a cybersecurity specialist, he will be able to put 1,000,001 technical complexities or vulnerabilities on the table. Give me a couple of beers and a nice whiskey, I'll do the same, okay? All it does, it's showing off what I know about today's vulnerabilities. It is practically useless unless I map those vulnerabilities to what you are doing and what your business needs.
Yes.
But in that conversation, I have decreased the complexity by maybe 3 orders of magnitude. So instead of you looking at 1,000,000 possible options, and most customers' reaction to 1,000,000 vulnerabilities, excuse me, I'm going to go hide in a corner, carry on without me.
Yes.
Once you put it down to 1,000, we can now have a conversation and come up with a top 100. And that top 100 is probably equivalent to 25% of your current security budget.
Yeah.
Now we're talking investment opportunity, and now we can work out, how well do we grow with this? Can we scale it with your business? Can we change your business direction? Can we start to use that secure framework as a foundation for new ideas? Because if you're not automating in the cloud, you are competing with people who are. If you are already automating into the cloud, then you are aware that if you look left or right, your next closest competitors are looking left and right back at you.
Yes.
To stay at the front of that race, security cannot be an afterthought. It's got to be one of your launch foundations. It's a bit like the rocket booster that Elon Musk built. That rocket will work, always work, and you do not even need to assume if it is working. You're building on top of it. And that's what good information security design means.
Yeah.
It's managing the risks in such a way that you can now take extra business risks and not worry about someone else coming in and stealing your thunder behind you.
Yeah.
It's not effort-free. There's a cost to it, but it's recognized, it's managed, it's proportioned to the value you need to give. This is not a technical conversation. Yeah, yes. It's not a technical conversation.
I agree. It's so important there. It's one of the things that, I mean, you've heard me hype this over and over and over in our conversations in different platforms, is that risk-based approach, your impact and your likelihood. How likely is, you mentioned having those 100 risks or 100 vulnerabilities on the table. That is scary. And to fix all of those is expensive, but you can bring that down to what actually applies in the environment. So, I mean, you've mentioned the word unique there in your conversation, I think, and it is unique to a business, I think. What do you think there? It's not, there's no one size fits all, I think we're getting through.
In terms of technologies, I would agree. The one thing we have in common, we are all unique. Every business, even with the same software suite, will have configured it in a way that made sense to their business.
Yes.
So those configurations, the way things were designed, the way they were plugged together. One of my current hobby horses that I'm riding at the moment is, we do have secure design into our DevOps space. It's happening, but we still don't have secure lifecycle. So a secure application isn't built secure in perpetuity. It has a cost to keep it secure, which is a cost of business. We're getting there, but it's not widely read. When we start looking at how this is playing into that model, we are putting in something secure, we are building it, we've got a value chain attached to it. How we keep that working is not as expensive as building it and constructing it in the first place. But that keeping it working, that layer of maintenance, that layer of support, we hear the term thrown in, it's back to basics. Well, back to basics is often the bit of IT that is cut away because we've never had a problem there. Why do we need to do it? If your company is more than 3 or 4 years old and you still have legacy infrastructure, you've probably outsourced the maintenance and support of your older iron or older tin or whatever metal we used back then. And it's expensive. So you reduce the time on site for your engineer. He comes on board and says, right, you've got these 70 things need fixing. The budget says fix 3. Over the years, you build up with a layer where there's a vulnerability in this platform, in this platform, in this platform. And before you know it, you've actually got all the holes aligned and you're exposed to some threat that's coming in.
The perfect storm from technical debt.
That's exactly it. It's not a surprise. For example, if you go out and buy yourself an absolutely top of the range M series BMW 635, nice engine, sports car, shiny body, and you drive it out the showroom and you drive it like you stole it. I'm not advocating that as a business model, by the way.
Shoot.
And you drive it and you drive it and you drive it, right? You spend every penny you have on getting that thing out of the showroom. You can barely afford the fuel, which it drinks a lot of. You have a service plan for the first couple of years. When you buy your IT systems, you have a service plan. Now it becomes regular maintenance. It's not cheap. So you decide not to maintain it. You will run that thing for another 3 or 4 years. And if your driving style is how fast can it go between traffic lights, you will find that it decays through normal use. Not through anything extra, not through crashing it, not through people damaging it, not through people vandalizing it, just normal use. It will wear. That is true for software, it is true for infrastructure, it is true for connectivity and networks. Things just get old and they wear. If you don't maintain your BMW regularly, you would not be surprised after 5 years driving down the road at 160, possibly trying to avoid that speed trap you just drove through, if your engine blows up. At which point your entire investment becomes zero.
Yeah.
That analogy applies to business IT systems, support, care, maintenance, and security. You have to keep looking at it. If you're not doing your monthly or quarterly maintenance, eventually you call it technical debt, maintenance debt. It builds up. Most of our cybersecurity incidents that we encounter, I say most, almost the majority, I have yet to encounter anyone whose breach was caused by a 0-day vulnerability. I've encountered many people who failed to patch, failed to maintain, failed to configure, failed to test their configurations, did not have code review in an automatic code deployment cycle. All of these things are low tech, cheap to do. And they lead to a massive ransomware attack. Or they lead to your database of customers being sold to the North Koreans or someone like that. By the way, I've never actually met a North Korean hacker, so let's see. I don't know. But the principle that back to basics is actually just doing things sensibly. It's not just a security thing. If you're struggling with the concept of back to basics, if patching is an issue, maintenance, updates, version modifications, transferring to the newer version of an application or a newer operating system, if those are issues, then it's endemic in your IT cycle. But if your IT cycle is not properly governed, it affects your security side.
Yeah, that is very true. I've got an interesting question for you then, I think. We talk about this being like it's not just a security problem, it's not just an IT problem. What part do you think culture plays in this in an organization? And this is maybe going to end up in a second episode sometime. But because I feel like this is probably going to be a big answer. But talking about this being so broad, how does culture in an organization play into this? I mean, we talk about culture working, we've seen it in leadership magazines and things for a long time now, like you must be open and trustworthy. And now we've got zero trust on the tech side. How do you think culture plays into all of this security, IT, and still trying to avoid that draconian view and things like that? So maybe a bit of a curveball question there.
Well, it's strange you ask, because that's where I was heading. Because if your organization is such that cutting corners on maintenance, what's a term that I've heard used in the past? Sweating your assets. That's an industrial term. It normally means using things beyond their maintenance date to gain those extra 2 or 3 years worth of value without paying maintenance. Well, in the IT space, I think we sweated our assets until they're pretty much rusted to the floor.
Yes.
That did not happen because IT wanted it to happen. It happened because a business decision was made not to invest in IT. For whatever reason, it became an active business call. So that whole process speaks to the culture of an organization. And I'll take it through. That culture is a two-way street. The decision is most definitely made at the highest level of any company. I mean, if you're a two-man company, it's an argument over coffee. But if you're a 200 or 300 person, you'll have a CFO, CEO, a technology officer. They would not willingly take any action or any decision that would damage their company. Yeah. Because they are totally dependent on that company and its performance over relatively short cycles to pay their salaries and their bonuses. So they have a vested interest in the company staying healthy. So the culture that I am talking about is one of accountability and one of communication. Because if you are aware in your IT systems or your security systems or your business applications that you are struggling to keep them in a fit state to conduct business, you would need to encourage your company to invest in fixing them, updating them, migrating to the cloud, rewriting them. These are all paid for technical processes which require investment, and as such will normally deliver much greater value than that investment for the business. But if these conversations haven't taken place and all that happens is someone says, I need an extra 10 million rand to maintain this system, and the budget is tight. I can't remember when budget wasn't tight. I've been doing this for 35 years and I can never remember where, there's extra money to spend. Never happened. You have to justify it. So the culture works two ways. If you are in a position of technical accountability, you need to know how to explain these risks of failure to invest in terms that business can understand. And equally, if you're in the business, if you are the keeper of the cash box, if you're the equivalent of whatever a chief financial officer or finance manager does today, you know what your capital loans, what the banks will lend you. You know what your operational costs are, which is basically the cash flow through your business. You know what makes sense to take to invest into future business opportunity. You should be asking, are my systems fit for the purpose they were built for? Okay, if they were built 6 months ago, that's a reasonable question. If they were built 6 years ago, it's an inescapable question.
Yes.
So this is where I'd say, yes, it does come down to culture. So IT and security need to be communicating in a business language, and the business keeper of the money, or hopefully the person who wishes to take that money, invest it and make more money, needs to be prepared to interrogate IT, interrogate security, interrogate networks, until they get a business comprehensible answer.
It's very interesting you say that. Some of the best implementations of cybersecurity I've seen is where the CFO has taken an active involvement in understanding what is happening, either with privacy or with cybersecurity. It's uncanny how that happens when the CFO gets involved. It's a different story.
Yes. So in fact, that's a good model. If you look in any organization, human beings like to simplify and classify to fit into our minds so we can focus on what matters. We build silos in businesses, even small businesses. We have this habit of compartmentalizing it. The CFO has that secret silo that everybody needs to knock on the door and speak to, because without the money that he or she controls, nothing works.
Yeah.
So by definition, the CFO should also have an interest in how that money is being used, and is it being used wisely? So literally, that's no longer a silo. That is providing a foundation for all of the other silos. By the way, I tried to put this in a Venn diagram. I'm still confused. On the security side, the model I was trying to explain was in every other discipline of the business, just as finance is important, there's a dependency on IT for infrastructure availability and information management. There is an equal dependency on security to make sure nothing that you think is valuable can be stolen, ransomware, or breached. So all of these silos need to become way more intimate with their peer silos to the point of collaboration, but it's becoming a survival trait. We don't have enough money in the system to do things twice because we got it wrong the first time. We need to get it close enough to working first time round, and that now needs to be sustainable.
Yeah.
That speaks directly to business culture. It's a change. And I'm having more of those conversations in the last few months as we are starting to realize that this work from home, by the way, we've been able to work from home for the last 12, 14 years.
Yeah.
There is actually a business advantage to being able to do business all the time, anywhere, right? Business never said, make it happen securely. Because if we had been doing our job, there wouldn't be even a question of doing it insecurely. That's part of that conversation. So that's why the conversations taking place now are much more exciting, because business doesn't have the money it used to have. We're no longer in a cash-rich environment. We're not in a growth economy.
Yeah.
We are in a reduce our costs and maximize our profits, which means we need to start doing things slightly more sensibly. And cybersecurity done right, that is actually an opportunity enabler, because it prevents damage.
Absolutely. I think that is so beautifully summed up what we're speaking about here. I think that's exactly what we need to really focus on in this space. So Steve, just in wrapping up, I see we're heading up on time now. One thing I ask our guests is if you had a single quick win that you would recommend for security in an organization, what would that be?
Quick win based on 3 engagements. I will not name any of the innocent or guilty parties. Make sure that at least once a month, you know everyone who has legitimate access to your systems. Make sure that you have multi-factor authentication enabled for every access, and check that your system configurations are as clean as they are supposed to be, not as they are reported. Run tests, run audits on that. It's relatively low cost, low impact. Believe me, if you start to do that on a monthly basis, it will pay for itself tenfold within 12 months.
Couldn't agree more. That's a fantastic quick win to put in. Steve, I'm going to say a very big thank you for the conversation. I think this has been incredibly valuable, and we've covered so much of the space. It's awesome. As usual, you and I could probably speak for about 3, 4, 5 hours on this stuff, and that's just day one. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for addressing our listeners. Thank you to the listeners for being here. And I look forward to seeing you again. Steve, if someone wanted to get hold of you, where would they get hold of you?
Okay, I'm Steve at custodiate.co.za. I'm on LinkedIn. And if you look up custodiate.co.za, there's a web page that pretty much says how brilliant I am and has my contact details on it.
Fantastic. Steve, thanks again for joining us. And thank you, everyone. Till next time, we'll see you then. Cheerio.
Goodbye.